Ladies and gentlemen, I'm triggered. Cameron Bertuzzi of Capturing Christianity has triggered me, despite the fact that he put a trigger warning for atheist label on this post. And really, I'm here to talk about why. Because despite the fact that there's a label, um, this level of stupidity absolutely just triggers me and was enough to motivate me to make a video. So let's go through this. First off, we're just going to one more note about trigger warnings. This is the sort of bullshit bravado style of evangelical apologetics, the Frank Turek's of the world, the Dinesh D'Souza when he did this crap. Even William Lane Craig in his popular level works, they want to pretend that they've got all the answers. They could refute all the atheist arguments. The atheists can't actually answer their arguments. It's a bunch of bravado, false bravado. If you go look at most informed philosophers of religion, even the Christian ones, they'll tell you atheism is rational and that there are defensible responses to theistic arguments, just as there are defensible responses to um, atheistic arguments for theists. Um, People like Cameron love to point it out when atheist philosophers say such things, but they never really reciprocate. They like the status quo in one way, but not in the other. Um, but when you put this kind of bravado on, and you put this sort of stupidity behind it, I'm going to point out the problems. So he tries to give a greater goods theodicy here. So basically, he says the reason God allows suffering is that he creates a world that only contains the greatest goods. And so, well, what kind of greatest goods could there be? And so, what he wants to do, and other apologists like to do this too, they want to talk up evil necessitating goods. And so, if you want to make these sorts of things that we would intuitively think of as good things, like courage, forgiveness, and sacrifice, you're going to think that if you could think and talk those up as the best kinds of goods, and they necessitate suffering, well then, boom, you've got a great apologetic for the problem of evil, which is probably the biggest problem for theism as a position. There are quite a lot of problems with this. I'm going to start with the first for Christians in particular. So, the thing is, he says these are the greatest goods, and they're because they're love manifesting virtues like courage, forgiveness, and sacrifice. Um, well, this is a problem for divine aseity in that God is perfect, and God cannot increase in His perfection, because if He increases in His perfection over time, then God wasn't perfect to the maximal extent before He created anything, right? And Christians, in particular, most theists, are committed to the position that God created everything that is not God. So um, this is a bit of a problem because if there is no suffering, then God cannot manifest love manifesting virtues like courage or forgiveness or sacrifice. It's not as though one member of the Trinity could wrong the other because then he wouldn't be perfectly good. So if God can't instantiate these greatest goods, that seems to be a problem for God's perfection. On top of it, if God's nature is supposed to ground the good, which I believe Cameron holds to, but quite a lot of other Christian apologists also do it, you would wonder, are these things actually good on their axiological view? Because if God, by necessity, can't manifest these sorts of things without actually creating something, then it's not good. What grounds that goodness? God can't be courageous because nothing can hurt him. There's nothing for God to fear. Um, Now, I think Randall Rouser, I had posed this problem to him in the past, and I think the way he went is to try and answer this problem was to say that things like courage are a manifestation of something like wisdom. In particular, it's a type of wisdom or some other kind of good that God could exemplify. I think the problem with that route is to say that in such a case, then it's really wisdom what's good, or whatever other thing you want to try and cash these uh, things out in, is the ultimate good, and so therefore there's nothing extra specific or extra good about these evil necessitating versions of the good if they ground out in something that doesn't necessitate evil, right? So those are two, sort of internal problems to Christian theological positions or common theistic theological positions to say why we should think things like courage and forgiveness and sacrifice are um, the greatest goods or so worth it that God must allow, like child cancer and Holocaust and all sorts of other things. Um, Now, there's a couple of other reasons why I think this is especially problematic. I don't think intuitively we're going to say that these are the greatest goods, right? So let's look at courage in particular. I if I am raising two children that I love dearly, and I'm trying to instill within them a good character. And I think if I had to choose, would I like to raise a loving child or a child that it grows to be a loving person who loves and cares for their own children or their own family or whatever they sort of grow up to eventually have in their lives. I think that's more important than them being courageous. Like if they're like so fearful that they won't rush into a burning building to save strangers, whereas somebody else who is doing it courageously, but that person who was brave enough to go rush in and save strangers because he thinks it's going to get him, sexual partners, as he's lauded as a hero, right? He's not doing it out of love of his fellow humankind. He's doing it for other reasons, selfish ones. Then he's generally an asshole or not very loving, sadistic or whatever else, right? That's you'd rather than be a loving person than be courageous as a trait, right? Like courage on its own doesn't uh, seem to me to be sort of highest level good, right? Sacrifice, forgiveness, same sorts of things, right? I think we see forgiveness and sacrifice to be good because it achieves ends like our love, right? So he does say these are love manifesting goods, but the love is really what's doing the work here. And like these are bad things that are entailed in order to be loving, which you didn't have to be. So I think just in general, that's a good response. But I think the biggest knockdown for this position in particular, and especially for Christianity, is any religion that has the concept of an afterlife in heaven, is that heaven is a place with no suffering or sin or anything else. And so, if there's no suffering or sin or anything else, then you cannot manifest any of these evil or suffering uh, mandating goods. So, if these are so worth it, why is the ultimate payoff to go to a heaven where you can't manifest them anymore? I mean, even on the view, God's supposed to wipe away on Christianity anyway. That God's supposed to wipe away the heaven and earth and make a brand new heaven and earth, and everything's supposed to be perfect and it's blissful, peaceful eternity with God, no suffering, no evil, no hatred, no wanting for anything. If you're in heaven anyway, and so all of these are gone. So this is God does all the problem of evil for a finite number of goods, of courage, forgiveness, and sacrifice. I don't buy it, right? Because you can't manifest them. There's an infinite amount of the other goods that are not evil necessitating. So I really just don't buy it. I think even intuitively, even if we take the religions out of the picture, it's really not that good. And then there's this awesome bit, and props to Stephen Law for pointing this out in the Twitter thread. Cameron actually contradicts himself in the second half of this tweet. He says that suffering is evidence against atheism because atheism doesn't really predict anything. He likes to say atheism is a non-informative hypothesis, right? We could quibble on that, but yes, it doesn't actually narrow the probability space because atheism doesn't really predict a whole lot of things, whereas theism does, right? If God existed, we'd exist in a heaven world, really, and we obviously don't, and so therefore there's no God. Um, but he says suffering is extremely surprising, given atheism. But if atheism doesn't predict anything and doesn't narrow the probability space at all, then nothing is surprising on atheism at all. At least without not a lot of other auxiliary hypotheses, which I doubt atheists are going to sign up for. Um, so it's just a fun little thing of how he's just got this yearning. Maybe trigger warning for Cameron. He's got this yearning to be able to. He wants to flip the tables. He wants to pull a Frank Turek and be like, "Aha! Well, suffering is not evidence against theism. It's evidence against atheism." It's a bunch of crap. It's a really stupid attempt a bunch of crap to try and turn the tables. He's not even trying to offer a defense. He's trying a pathetic attempt at a reversal for the biggest problem for his philosophical view. So, congrats, Cam. This is what happens when I get triggered. Thanks for watching.